to, to piggyback on Nelson, what he taught last week. This is something that him and Denise has been working on, and developing and researching, and it's a topic that I've also studied that's dear to my heart, and not really flushed out in mainstream religion, mainstream Christianity. And it's led to some very difficult understandings. And so Nelson did such a good job. I want to piggyback on that. I'm going to have a little bit more of an inclusive view, but still the same principle of what he's talking about, and it's the word Gentile. It's been weaponized, and so we're going to dig into that a little bit and see what happened. Where did that word Gentile come from? What's the origins, and why was it weaponized? So I've been recent scholarship has come up, and this book, Jason Staples wrote this book called Paul and the Resurrection of Israel, and it's basically who is Israel and what's a Gentile and how does it all fit in, and what's Paul really saying in Romans, right, and throughout his letters. And so, and it's a very interesting book. It's turned academia on its head, and they're having discussions and symposiums, and they haven't thought this way for like 2,000 years. Somewhere along the line, they got switched, and it's not really Jerome's fault, but he's the reason we got the word Gentile. And it's not really Paul's fault, because he never knew what the word Gentile was. Paul is using Greek, and the word for nations is ethne, right? Which is nations, right? It would be goyim in the Hebrew, right? So, and Paul writes ethne, but it's translated as Gentiles, and it's been weaponized. We'll talk about it. So this is kind of a viewpoint of Josephus, not just Josephus, but Second Temple literature, Old Testament prophets, is that Israel has always been categorized as 12 tribes. And then they got separated. But it's still Israel as a whole, and the Jews become a subset of Israel, right? So there's a thing of Israel, and then there's non-Jewish Israelites. It's a term I just learned. And I get it. It makes sense. Non-Jewish Israelites. They're not from the tribe of Judah. They're from the tribe of the northern tribe, but they're still called Israelites. So we're going to see through the prophets, the Old Testament, Second Temple literature, how they viewed Israel, right? So I'm going to take a little drive down memory lane, and we're going to start here, and I'm going to build on this idea and take you, what I'm thinking is what's being presented as a picture of a whole. And as I see it, it's a very beautiful picture. So in Genesis 12, God is talking to Abraham. And he says, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curse you, and in all the families of the earth shall be blessed. In you, Abraham. And so we come to this word blessed, But this time in Genesis 12:3, it's blessed. It has the word Baruch as the root word, but it's got some additional letters that changes its meaning. And it's Nevraku. And Nevraku can be traced to an agricultural term. We'll see here in Rashbam, in the parallels verse 28:14, that the meaning comes in mind regards of the word benevraku in Genesis 12:3 is to graft a branch. Nevraku. It's an agriculture term, to graft in. I mean, Paul comes in with the grafting language of Romans 11. You know, where did he get it from? He reads Hebrew. He understands that this is the very beginning of God's idea of what he wants to do, right? He's already, got Adam and Eve. They got kicked out. They moved down. They got 12 tribes. They go into the land. They get kicked out, right? And so they're just Adam and Eve. They break one commandment. They're out. Nation of Israel. They break the commandments of the wedding covenant, which is also the vow and the commandment and the covenant, and they're kicked out. And then you got the Tower of Babel, where all the nations are now building one thing and trying to reach God, and God doesn't agree with that and says that's got to stop. And he stops it. He scatters it and divides their languages into 7 different languages. And then he scatters those 70 languages, right? And so then you see that all of a sudden now he's got to focus on Abraham. And Abraham's an idol worshiper. He crossed the Euphrates and worshiping the sun with his brother and his sister and his dad, and God calls him out. And he says, I made myself known to Abraham because I knew he would teach his children justice and righteousness. He knew it. So I'm going to start with this guy, and I'm going to rebuild this whole program through one guy, and then a family, and then a nation. And and this is his direction he's going. So, and he says, in Abraham, all the families shall be grafted in. Nevraku. Grafted into what? He says, into Abraham, into the family of Abraham. Paul makes that same language. You're the seed. You got the seed of Christ, you're grafted into the family of Abraham. And heirs according to what? To the inheritance promised to Abraham. So then we move down to Genesis 22. Well, then we go to Genesis 15. And God's telling him, hey, well, Abraham, you're going to have a son, and in your seed, all the nations will be blessed. And Abraham says, well, I don't have a son. He says, how will I know? And so God says, all right, you know the drill. You cut the animals in half, and I'm going to walk through the middle of them as a blood covenant. Then only God walked through it, and it's his own way of saying, I swear by myself. I'm the only one making this covenant. And he's saying, I'm making it. You're not involved, Abraham. You go take a nap, because I'm taking on the full responsibility of making sure that you have a seed. And I'll take on the full responsibility that seed is going to do what I've purposed it to. And so Abraham, God walks down the middle of the pieces, and it's basically saying, I'm going to make this happen without you, Abraham. In Genesis 12:3, he says, I'm going to bless you, and in you all the nations will be grafted in. And then in Genesis 17:18, he says, in your seed all the nations will be blessed through you and your seed. right? And it's like he's given this unconditional covenant that says, I'm going to do it with or without your help. It came out of my mouth. God says, if it comes out of your mouth as a vow or an oath, you must perform it. He's got to do it. And so he is going to make this happen that in Genesis he says, I'm going to your seed, and then he says, and the nations will be grafted in. It's a package deal. Your seed and the nations grafted in. Everybody's going to be grafted in to the seed of Abraham, to the family of Abraham, into the faith of Abraham. That's the plan. And he trusts Abraham, and Abraham, follows through. I mean, he does amazing things. So in Genesis 22, this is Abraham's about ready to kill his son, and the angel comes out and says to Abraham the second time, said, by myself I have sworn. So whenever God raises a hand, swears by himself, you know he's going to do it. He has to do it. Says the Lord, because you have done this thing and not withheld your son, your only son, blessings I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven and as the sands of the sea. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So he's saying, I've sworn by myself that you're going to have descendants that's going to be like the stars of the heaven and the sands of the sea that can't be numbered. God's promised this to Abraham. Well, you look at the Jewish count today, and maybe 12, 18 million out of 9 billion people. What happened to the stars? And then he says that you're going to be a father of a multitude of nations. Not a nation, but nations plural. And that's the only way that this stars of heaven and the sands of the sea can make sense, that these being a father to a multitude of nations means a very inclusive amount. It's, you got to think that God creates the heavens. He created Adam and Eve to multiply and subdue the earth with imagers of God. Well, then they got kicked out of the ark. And then he tells the Israelites, I want you to expand to the left and to the right and expand the kingdom of God. Go to the nations, share the light. And so we see this unconditional promise that God says that all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in Abraham's seed. It's a promise. All the nations. And you're going to be a father of a multitude of nations. I think we just got to really envision what is he going. And he tells that to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Each one, he says, you're going to be a father of a multitude of nations. Multitude. So, they're all God's children, the Muslims and North Korea and wherever, right? They're all his children. And we're parents, some of us that are parents, we know how we value our children. So then Genesis 12:2, we'll go back there, and he says, I will make thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and magnify thy name, and thou shalt be blessed. That word nation is goy in the Hebrew. It's ethnos in the Greek. But in the Latin Vulgate, you can see gentum magnum, great nation. Gentum is the word for nations, or for Gentiles. There's gentum, gentes, all various forms of Gentiles. So the word Gentile comes from the Latin Vulgate, right? We can see down here at the bottom, Gentium is a Latin word meaning the nations or belonging to the nations. So it's strange that the translators are using, because Paul's writing, most of the stuff we're going to talk about is what Paul writes about, is using the Greek language, but then they throw in this Latin word for Gentile that really throws a loop. It really causes some problems. And we'll see that, when they translate the Bible we have to do, the King James Bible, that they've brought in some of the Latin words. Like tribulation is the Latin word tribulum, which is the board they do the threshing floor of the wheat, right? That's tribulation on the wheat. God calls us wheat. The word stavros in the Greek means stake, and he says, I'm going to be crucified. He uses the word stavros, and then Jerome translated stavros as crux. So here we see here in another Genesis chapter, he says, neither shall thy name be called any more Abram, but thou shalt be called Abraham, because I have made thee a father of many nations. So go up to the top level of that. You see patrim, that's father. Multerum, that's a multitude, father of a multitude of gentilium. Nations. So Jerome's use of the word Gentiles means nations. So what is Paul saying? What is Jerome saying when he's talking about Abraham? I'm going to make you a great Gentile, right? A great bunch of Gentiles. And then he says, you're going to make you a father of many Gentiles. That's what Jerome's saying. But that's not what Genesis is saying. It's just saying, because of the word we understand as Gentiles, as non-Jewish. It's everything but the Jews, right? So it's the Italians and the Germans and the what have you, the Thailand people. Those people, the Gentiles. Jews are the Jews, and the Gentiles are not the Jews. But what is Jerome saying? He's saying to Abraham, you're going to be a great bunch of Gentiles. And then, we see down here at the bottom, the Latin Vulgate was completed by St. Jerome around 405 AD, commissioned by the Pope Damasus I in 382. So in the almost 400 years after Paul's writing, after the death of Jesus and the resurrection, Jerome comes onto the scene and starts writing Gentiles. Paul has never, ever used this word. He was never exposed to it, right? He didn't. And you can see it in the Greek. You can just see it's ethne. But then they put Gentiles in there. And I almost feel like it's a bias. They're trying to get away from the Jewish identity. Those first fathers of the church, Augustine, Jerome, writing back and forth saying, Paul and James and John and Peter, they still do the Old Testament, and they still circumcise, and they still sacrifice animals, and they're downplaying that view of the first century church, and they're even mentioning that some of the early church fathers has called that an anathema, that they should be damned or cursed. This is Peter, James, John, Paul, and Jesus acted this way. Are you kidding me? That's what the church says about us. Oh, you're Judaizers, right? Oh, you're just under the law. You just want to bring me under bondage. No, we're following the first century church. If you look up the word disciple, It says to emulate your teacher. Who's our teacher? Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. Christ is the example, the standard, and that's what we should follow. If he ate kosher, we should eat kosher. If he attended Sabbath, we should attend Sabbath. If he valued the feast days, if we're a disciple, we'll do the same. We'll emulate that image. The very word New Testament is Latin for Novum Testamentum. The very word New Testament is Latin. So all this Latin is imposed that we just take for granted. It just means new covenant is what it means in Latin. In English, Latin, it's Novum Testament or New Testament. Exodus 12, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this is the month, shall be the beginning of your months, it shall be the first month of the year to you. So he's beginning right here at this moment to give them the biblical calendar that they can start tracking off Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits. This is the calendar that he's given. And at this time, he says, this is the beginning of months. And then he says, speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his fathers, and a lamb for a household. This is Passover. And he says to speak to the congregation of Israel. How come he doesn't say children of Israel? Why does he change it to the congregation of Israel? The word congregation is idah, and it means congregation, assembly, a multitude. It's a Hebrew word that translates to a community of like-minded people. It's not just an ethnic thing right now. It's now like-minded, like everybody that's seen the 9 plagues that God brought down and witnessing the God of Israel bringing these plagues down, and witnessed the death of the firstborn. These are the like-minded people said, we want to go with Moses. And what's interesting is this word idah, the root word is yaed. That's the same root word as moed has. Moed is feast days, to assemble, for a divine appointment, for a fixed appointment. And now idah, the congregation of Israel, is root word is yaed. And it means to agree, an appointment of assembly, appoint to betroth. So the moed is an assembly to betroth, and the idah, congregation of Israel, is a congregation for betrothal, right? Well, mention the Passover. That's the beginning of the betrothal moment. That's what Jesus is doing back in Luke 22 when he says, I've greatly wanted to have this Passover with you, or this betrothal moment. They're betrothed. It's the threshold covenant. They cross over the threshold. Clay Trumbull's book, The Threshold Covenant, shows that they did it all the way from Alaska to China, and they would put something in the threshold, whether it was fire or straw or candles or blood. You were to cross over it, and you were coming into covenant, and many times that covenant was a wedding covenant. So we can see the very congregation of Israel is tied to betrothal. We can see the moeds are tied to betrothal. This is the assembly that Moses is gathering together. And the people that he's gathering to be for betrothed is not the children of Israel, but the congregation of Israel, which is the like-minded people that were there. This word idah in the Greek is synagogue, synagoge. Synagogue is a Greek word. It's not a Hebrew word. We tend to think it is, but it just means an assembly of like-minded people. All the Jews go there, right? Some of the proselytes went with the Jews, and some of the non-present, like Cornelius, he goes and hangs out he does all, he prays at the ninth hour, he gives alms, he's connected, right? And so this word synagogue is the congregation of Israel. You got James saying, when a man comes to your meeting, that word meeting is synagogue. Why did they change it to meeting? And when all the other places that synagogue is used, they use like the synagogue of Satan. But when James uses it, they change it to meeting. I'm saying it's a biased view. They don't want to connect James with the synagogue that Jews go to, right? I don't know. There's something about that. And we see that, I don't care what translation you read, there's somebody's bias involved in it, even King James or whatever. So we got this congregation of Israel that he gave instructions to for the Passover. And this congregation doesn't necessarily mean it's an ethnic congregation, it's a like-minded congregation. Like when it talks about the congregation of angels, the Idah of angels, we know that some angels had the like-mindedness to rebel, and we know that some of the angels had a like-mindedness to stay faithful. So those are two different congregations, two different like-minded groups of people. But this is a like-minded group of people that's involved with the whole process of the 9 plagues, and now the 10th plague, and now he's giving them instructions to do the Passover for the 10th plague, and he's bringing a congregation of like-minded people into a betrothal moment. And this is not just an ethnic idea. Exodus 12:18. First month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your house. Since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Same group of people. So this is all the like-minded people that are participating in the Passover. And now here's the same instructions for unleavened bread given to the congregation of Israel, the like-minded people, whether he is a stranger or native in the land. So he's connecting congregation of Israel with stranger and native of the land. He's saying whether you're a stranger or a native, if you're like-minded people of Israel, of congregation of Israel, you're part of the congregation of Israel, the like-minded people. So it's not an ethnic thing. You shall eat nothing leavened in your dwellings, you shall eat unleavened bread. So these are definitely instructions. In fact, it's covenantal language because you could be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Then the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. A mixed multitude went up with them also, flocks and herds and a great deal of livestock, and they baked unleavened bread, cakes of the dough which they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened. So it says you got 600,000 of men on foot, besides children. Mixed multitude went with them. So you got 12 tribes and a mixed multitude that are now leaving Egypt, that I'm saying the mixed multitude is part of the congregation of Israel. Because they're leaving. They're getting out. They've understood what they needed to do, and they all want to go with Moses, and now they're like-minded with the people that want to leave with Moses. And so the mixed multitude is the congregation of Israel, which is part of Israel. And they went up from them, and the flocks and herds and a great deal of livestock, and they baked unleavened bread. So this is all these Israelites, mixed multitude, baking unleavened bread, because this is the day of unleavened bread when they left, right? So, Romans 9. For I could wish that I myself were cursed for Christ, for my brethren, my countrymen according to the flesh, who are Israelites. Nelson brought this up last week. He's talking about the Jewish nation and calling his countrymen according to the flesh, and he's calling them Israelites. Because Israelites is a term for all 12 tribes, but there are also non-Jewish Israelites that are scattered amongst the nations, right? It's kind of a hard concept thing, and it's because we've been so pounded by Gentiles as non-Jewish. And that's, and if you see how Jerome wrote it, he's saying, Abraham, you're going to have a bunch of Gentiles, right? And then we'll see when he gets to the Mount Sinai, he says, Moses, I'm going to make you a kingdom of priests and a holy bunch of Gentiles. You're going to be a holy bunch of Gentiles, right? Set apart Gentiles. Clearly including 12 tribes of Israel and a congregation, which includes the mixed multitude. He says, if I were to be accursed for Christ, for my brethren, my countrymen according to the flesh, who are Israel. Nelson brought this up and nails who's Israel. And Paul is not Jewish Israelites, but he's hanging out with non-Jewish Israelites. There's two different things. We get confused. But it's not that the word of God has failed, for not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel. Now, Christianity, mainstream, has said, see, the Jews, just because they were born from Israel doesn't mean they're Israel. They've been cast aside, they rejected the Messiah, and many believe that God's done with them and that will not have anything to do with them. They're destined for hell and all-time eternity of torment. So in this book, Paul and the Resurrection of Israel, he brings up this point, for not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel. And this is in the context of Romans 9, 10, 11, which is, Paul uses Israel 13 times in this thing, right? And sometimes he uses it for the Jew Israelite, and sometimes he uses it for the non-Jewish Israelite, that are the Gentiles, which just means nations. And so not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel. So Jason Staples is saying that he's talking about the mixed multitude. He's talking about the congregation of Israel that were non-ethnic, that were now called Israel. They were called the congregation of Israel, right? We should hope that's true, because some of us here are not descended from Isaac or Jacob, but we call ourselves Israel. So we are not, just because we were descended from Israel, we still belong to Israel. And so that's what he's saying here, that's what that word is, but they've distorted it, saying, no, God is done with the Jews. They're no longer called Israel. They're out. He's done with them. They rejected their Messiah. And then he goes on to say, nor are all the children because they are the seed of Abraham, but in Isaac your seed is called, and this is those who are the children of the flesh. These are not but the children of promise are counted as seed. For this is the word of promise, at this time I will come, and Sarah shall have a son. So the seed of the promise was that Abraham and Sarah would have their own son supernaturally, and that this seed was the seed of promise. And what was the promise? What's the seed of the promise for the promise? What promise is it? It's that you have to go back to Abraham when he says, and I will and your descendants, and it's a vav, it's a conjunction, it's connecting descendants, and the nations will be grafted in to the Abraham thing. It's an unconditional promise, and it's a package deal. I actually even see it that the Jews aren't getting in without the nations, and the nations ain't getting in without Jews. God wants this to be a package deal. And so this is going to have to be an eschatological completion that has to happen that make that happen, right? So he says, in Isaac your seed shall be called. That is, those who are the children of the flesh. These are not the children of God. The children of flesh. Well, who is the children of flesh? Ishmael was a child of flesh, but he's saying he's not part of the promised seed. I got a line that's going down, an ethnic line that's going all the way down to bring us to Messiah, to Yeshua. But Ishmael's not part, he's a seed of the flesh, right? And then Abraham marries Keturah and has 12 kids with her, right? 6 or 12. They're still the seed of Abraham, right? Then he has Isaac, who has Jacob and Esau. And God says to Rachel, in your belly is 2 nations. They're the same mother and father, the same seed, the same family, but he says they're going to be 2 different nations. So you can have more than one nation from the same seed. But Esau was not counted towards the election that God had planned to the seed of the promise. And he knows the end from the beginning. So he says, these are not the children, but the children of promise are counted. So, but God says at the beginning, it's all your descendants and all your seed and all the nations are going to be grafted in. But through this promised seed, you don't have to be part of the promised seed bloodline. I have a bigger picture for everything, right? Because we've got to understand what he means by, and your descendants in all the nations. He doesn't say all the nations that become obedient, all the nations that get converted to Christianity. He's left it kind of open, and we should chew on that. So the problem is now the people think, oh, it's only the promise of the seed of the promise. Those are the people that are God's people, right? And so so they go, oh, it's us Gentiles, non-ethnic Jew, who have now accepted Jesus Christ into our heart. We now have the seed of promise. And the other ones didn't accept Jesus, and they don't have the seed of promise in their heart, right? So you start to get this idea that there's, it's called replacement theology, right? We've replaced the Gentiles, the non-ethnic line, have now replaced the ethnic line, because we now have the seed of promise. You know, everybody wants to be Israel, right? I mean, the church calls themselves Israel, most of them. They want the blessings of Israel, but they don't want to do the accountability of Israel, right? They don't want to do, because Israel, we read it today, you know, Shema, O Israel, do the Sabbath. Shema, O Israel, do the feasts. These are divine appointments for the road to redemption, and I want you to keep them in your calendar, because God says they're in mine. And they will be there until completed. But the church says, no, we don't need to mess with all that stuff. We're Israel. But we're Gentile Israel, right? We don't need the covenant. So It's replacement theology. And I tell my friends that talk this way, I go, well, then you're telling me that when God told Abraham that his descendants and all the nations would be grafted in, he meant he should have said only a remnant of your people would be grafted in. But he doesn't say that. He says, your descendants, Abraham. And so if you're saying that he's done with the descendants of the Jews in Israel, then you're saying that God can't keep his promise. That makes me mad. Those are fighting words, right? And then they get mad at me. Oh, you're going there then, huh? And I go, yeah, I'm going there because God went there and Abraham went there. We're going there. Because it came out of God's mouth, and he says that if I swore it, I will perform it. Okay, Romans 9:10. And not only this, but when Rebekah had conceived by one man, even by our father Isaac, for the children not yet being born, not having done with good or bad, they're not even born, they haven't even done anything bad yet, that the purpose of God's according to the election might stand, not according to works, but of him who calls. The one's in charge, God. And it was said to her, the older shall serve the younger, as it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. So the word hate, you could translate as less esteemed, right? Because Jesus says, unless you hate your mother and your father, no, it's not hate, it's, you got to value me before your family, right? Because I'm here for your family. So here we're seeing that God says, Rebekah, you're going to have two children. Two nations are in your womb. They're both from you and your husband, one seed, the seed of Abraham. And they're going to be two nations, and I'm just going to choose one of them for my purpose, to carry this line down to Yeshua. He's got to be from the tribe of Judah. He's got to be connected to David. Okay, back to Exodus. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is the ordination of the Passover. No foreigner shall eat it. So, nobody passing by, the shoe salesman, the vacuum cleaner guy, just passing through, he's not going to eat it. But every man's servant who is bought with money, when you have circumcised him, then he may eat it. He's going back to the Abraham covenant. It's the same he told to Abraham. All the men with you, I want you to circumcise them. So they were probably not even of his line, because that's what it sounds like. They were just servants of him, but God still has them circumcise them. So what kind of covenant are they part of? They're not part of Abraham's seed, but they're part of some kind of a covenant. Ishmael was circumcised. He's part of some kind of a covenant. There's a bigger picture going on here. Okay, but every man's servant who is bought with money, then you shall have circumcised him, then you may eat it. So he's saying you got to get caught up with your covenants. You got to have the Abraham covenant first. You got to get circumcised. All your males in your group have got to be circumcised. Then you may partake of the next covenant, the Mosaic covenant. The circumcision covenant was for land and descendants and grafted in people. The Mosaic covenant is for a kingdom. You want to get cut? You got to do the land covenant. Now you do the kingdom covenant with Moses. And then you may eat the Passover. Verse 46, in one house it shall be eaten. You shall not carry any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break its bones, and all the congregation shall keep it. All the like-minded people of Israel shall keep it. So this is the same group of people, he says, pick a lamb on the 10th day. The same group of people he calls the congregation of Israel as stranger and the native born. I'm saying this is a group of people who share the same values, the same ideas. They've shared the same experience. That's what Edom means. And when the stranger dwells with you and wants to keep the Passover to the Lord, let all of his males be circumcised. And then let him come near and keep it, and he shall be as native of the land. The stranger that gets circumcised, that enters into the blood covenant, that's connected to a betrothal, God says he shall be native of the land. He's a citizen. For no uncircumcised person shall eat it. One law, one Torah shall be for his native born and for the stranger who dwells among you. Makes sense. You're like-minded. So what's interesting is that, God says, if you're not circumcised, don't be touching that Passover plate, right? But they were still able to do unleavened bread. They would still be able to do Pentecost. They were able to bring offerings to the eating, right? They were all included in that. But until you get circumcised, don't. And he didn't require them to. It was kind of like an open-ended idea, take your time, kick the tires, take it for a ride, and if you feel that you can now commit, then commit, because this is a blood covenant you're taking, and there's serious consequences on being involved in the Passover, because it is a blood covenant with the lamb and blood. Like Paul says in Corinthians, some of you have died and become sick because you didn't keep holy this day. This is a serious covenant. Okay. So one law shall be for the native born and for the stranger. But yet, if the stranger gets circumcised and all his males get circumcised, he may participate of the Passover. And the stranger can be now called native born. But he's in. He's signed the contract. He's part of the covenant and part of the curses that come with the covenant. So that's why God didn't say, you got 10 days from joining the congregation of Israel to get circumcised, or we're going to cut you off from the congregation of Israel. No. You take your time. This is a serious decision. And I think that's one of the reasons that Paul doesn't cause people to get circumcised that doesn't understand what the circumcision is, because it's a serious covenant, right? There's other reasons, but that's probably one of them. Okay, so we got the congregation of Israel. They all leave, and he gives them the instructions to do the Passover, and then he gives them the instructions of unleavened bread. And then we get to Joshua 5, and it says, this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came up out of Egypt were males, and all the men of war had died in the wilderness on the way, and after that they had come out of Egypt. Then he says in verse 5, for all the people who came out had been circumcised. So he says all the people that came out of Egypt had been circumcised. He doesn't say all the Israelites, all the Ephraimites. He says all the people. So I'm saying that the congregation of Israel, that God says to pick a lamb, they were instructed, you want in on this? You got to be circumcised. It's no different from the stranger, the native, the born. You got to be. So all the congregation of Israel, all the non-Jewish people, the Ethiopians, the Egyptians, if you want in on this covenant, you're getting circumcised. And Joshua says all of them were circumcised. He says, but the people born in the wilderness on the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. So for the 40 years, they didn't circumcise them. So when Joshua gets to the land, he says, we're going to enter the land of the covenant and the land of promise, and we got to get caught up on our covenants. We're about ready to do Passover. So you can't do Passover unless you've been circumcised. So he lines them all up and they all get circumcised. Okay, so we're going to move a little further down to Exodus 19. We're now at the mountain, and he says, "Have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself." Now, who's he talking to? Everybody that left Egypt. 12 tribes, mixed multitude, congregation of Israel. He says, "What I did to the Egyptians, and I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." Okay, so everybody's gathered at the mountain, left Egypt. I'm saying that's 12 tribes, mixed multitude, congregation of Israel. Everybody's standing there. Because at never any time does he mention, can the Egyptians and the Ethiopians please step to the back of the bus because this is for you. He never says that. You know, in Christianity, he says, oh, no, the law was just given to the Jews. Well, you better go back and read Exodus 12 and find out who the mixed multitude is. Find out who the congregation of Israel is. Who's the Edah of Israel? Because I think there's a bigger story going on here. And you're trying to exclude yourself because you just want to be in Israel with the blessings, and you don't want to have any of the accountability, the responsibility of being Israel, which is two words, Yasser and El, upright with El. You got to be upright with El. How do you define that? So he says, I'm going to make you a kingdom of priests. So everybody, well, all the males were going to be priests sitting at the mount of the thing. He wasn't saying, oh, I'm going to make Levites priests. No. He says, all people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. Now he's calling them children of Israel. Well, we know everybody's there. So is he concerning the children of Israel? I say he is. Verse 7, so Moses came and called the elders of the people and laid before them all these words which the Lord commanded. Then all together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will, all the people. And who's the we will do? Who's the people saying that? He doesn't say it's anybody different. It's all the people standing that heard the words of God. It's all the people that are now being accountable, and it's all the people, the 12 tribes of Israel, the mixed multitude, the congregation of Israel, that is now saying all the people. That's all the people. It doesn't say all the Israelites, all the Jews, all the Levites. No. All the people at the mountain answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. So it's not just Jews that were given the law. He's going to make a kingdom, and he wants more than just Jews to be part of the kingdom. It was never, back at Abraham's, he says, your descendants and all the nations grafted in. We're grafted into what? In the kingdom, in the faith of the Abraham that will be through the seed of the promise. It's a bigger picture. Verse 10, then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people, again he's saying people, and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash your clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. So he's telling, go to the people, kind of a general term. Consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of who? All the people. I'm saying this is an all-inclusive event. Everybody that left Egypt is there. Everybody is a witness. Everybody there he's calling the congregation of Israel, the like-minded people of Israel. Exodus 19:6, and you shall be to me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words you shall speak to the children of Israel. Now look at this bottom section. This is the Latin Vulgate. And you can see gens, sancta, Gentile, holy. He says, Jerome is saying, and you shall be to me a holy bunch of Gentiles. That's what Jerome's saying. And who is he talking about? 12 tribes and mixed multitude, the congregation of Israel. That's the word Jerome is using for Gentiles. This is an inclusive deal. Deuteronomy 29, and all of you standing before the Lord your God and the leaders in your tribes. So this is at the end of Moses' trip. They've been 40 years. He's getting ready to send them off into the land. And Moses is giving his final speeches. And he says, all of you standing here today, this is the Torah portion, Nitzavim. And all of you standing today, all who standing before the Lord your God, your leaders and your tribes and your elders and officers and all the men of Israel, your little ones and all your wives and also your stranger who is in your camp, from the one who cuts your wood to the one who draws your water. This is quite a list. Elders, little ones, wives, strangers that are all part of this group. The one who cuts your wood to the one who draws your water, that you may enter into what? A covenant with the Lord your God. I want all of you in this covenant and into his oath. Christianity says, no, this covenant was just for Israel. Okay, go back and read Deuteronomy 29. Go back and read Exodus 12. You're missing some key information, in my opinion. That you may enter into a covenant with the Lord your God and into his oath, which the Lord your God makes with you today, that he may establish you today as a people. What people? 12 tribes, mixed multitude, congregation of Israel, for himself. And that he may be a God to you, just as he has spoken to you, and just as he has sworn to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Deuteronomy 29, and I make this covenant, this oath, not with you alone, but with him who stands here with us today, those present, before the Lord our God, which includes a whole list of people, everybody that's there, who stands with us today before the Lord our God, as well as with him who is not here. Raise your hand if you weren't there. This is an all-inclusive covenant with anybody, because he already gives a whole list of people that's included. This is not an exclusive covenant just for ethnic Jews. Adam and Eve weren't ethnic, right? Well, they were, but so Jew is from the tribe of Judah, right? So you may not be from the tribe of Judah, because Paul calls himself a Jew, of the tribe of Benjamin. So Judah could be a geographical location. It could be a ethnic identity, or it can be an inclusive of everybody that lives in Judea, right? Does that make sense? And then, so you've got Judah, or Jews, and then you have Israel that got scattered, and then you have non-Jewish Israelites. That's the people that got scattered, right? They're not Jew, but they're still part of Israel. It's kind of confusing, but absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, no, I think so, because you look at James, he writes to the 12 tribes in the diaspora, right? They're scattered. Scattered seed, diaspora, scattered spora seed, right? And Peter says to the elect in the diaspora, the exiles. So the exiled ones that are called elect in the diaspora, right? So, yeah, they're scattered amongst all the nations. The majority of Judah maintained in Judah, but obviously some of them went with the northern tribe, and some of the northern tribe went down to Judah and are part of Judah, right? But the majority of them is what was called Ephraim, northern tribe, lost sheep, right? Divorced, cut off, kicked out of the house. Those people. Judah never got divorced. Israel got divorced. Okay. So he says, I'm making this covenant not with you alone, but with him who stands here with us today before the Lord, as you with him who is not here with us today, for you know that you dwelt in the land of Egypt. So this is an all-inclusive covenant. It's a covenant. This is the covenant that was for all the people that are standing there, 12 tribes, mixed multitude, congregation of Israel, now at the mountain, making a covenant, being called to be a priest and a holy bunch of Gentiles, right? A holy nation, set apart nation. And so part of the story is that God says you're a holy nation, a set apart nation, but then they started acting like the nations. And then God says, okay, I got to divorce you and kick you out of the house. And now you're no longer set apart nation. You're just a nation. You're no longer a set apart Gentile. You're just a Gentile, right? You're kicked out. You act like the Gentiles, you are a Gentile. Let's see. So then we get to Deuteronomy 24. So we've moved to the covenant, the making of the covenant. Now, in this process that Moses is giving his final speeches, he talks about the law of the husband, right? And he says, and if a man finds a woman, there's a reason he doesn't want to be married to her, that he is to give her a certificate of divorce and put it in her hand and send her out of the house. Then he says, then the former husband who divorced her must not take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord. You shall not bring sin on the land in which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. He's telling us, as you get married, you stay married, right? Otherwise, there's going to be difficulties, and you could be creating bigger problems for yourself and for the land. But not only is that, but he's talking about himself because he is now betrothed to everybody that was at the mountains, right? That was everybody that participated in Passover in the betrothal moment. Now he's moved to the mountain, Mount Sinai, which is where you get the ketubah, the wedding instructions. And then eventually they'll move off for tabernacles, which is the wedding feast. That hasn't happened yet. And so he's saying here that if you give your wife a divorce And she goes out, and so Israel, he gives Israel divorce in Jeremiah 3. And then they go out and have relationships with Moloch and Shamash and with the other gods. And God said, you're an abomination, I can't take you back. You got 10/12 of the wife, 10/12 of the bride, 10/12 of the kingdom are now cut off, divorced, kicked out of the house, and he says, you can't come back. You're an abomination. It's a big problem. That some of the Jewish writings, they're struggling with this, you know. How does a God that never dies, well, let's see if I got it here. Okay, I don't. It'll be in Paul's thing. But in Deuteronomy 24, he says that if the husband dies, then that woman is free to move on, to get another husband. And Paul is going to unpack that for us. So Jeremiah 3, I saw that for all the causes of backsliding Israel had committed. So backsliding is, who's he talking to right here? Jeremiah 3, backsliding Israel. He's talking to the northern tribe. And committed adultery, and I have put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. Then, so Jeremiah 3, he's giving her a divorce that can't be reversed because she goes out and she's created abominations. This is Israel, the northern tribe, the lost sheep. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Now, I've asked my Christian friends, I go, because whenever they say, oh, yeah, we're in the new covenant now, you know, or, you know, you're commanded to have ham on Easter, right? He says, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And so I'll go, oh, the new covenant, sure, yeah. I go, which one are you? And they go, what do you mean? Well, you got to be house of Israel, house of Judah. So he's mentioning here in a new covenant, which one are you? And not literally, some of them have the deer in the headlight look, right? Well, we're Gentiles. Gentiles are enlisted here, right? Jerome doesn't come for 800 years, so, you know, there's problems. So, and I'm saying, well, you got to be part of Israel and Judah to be part of a new covenant. That's what God says. And since Israel included mixed multitude, lost sheep, congregation of Israel, they're the ones that got sent off and divorced. Judas remained. I'm going to say that I'm going to be part of the house of Israel, the part of the mixed multitude, right? But then, so he divorces him, Jeremiah 3. He promises him a new covenant. So the new covenant is a wedding contract, right? Because he says, I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel, and I will write my law on your heart. So the covenant is separate from the law. And he says, then the covenant's going to be new, but he never says, and I'll write my new law on your heart. The covenant is what's going to be new, because the covenant is a wedding contract. You've broken it, you got cut off, you got divorced, you got kicked out of the house. I got to fix it because I made a promise to Abraham. And that's why he's always saying, for my name's sake, my reputation's sake, I got to keep that promise. And I intend to, with or without your help. So then verse 33, he says, this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days. So it starts out with Israel and Judah, but then it just comes down to Israel. It's one group. Right? So when this new covenant happens, Israel and Judah is going to be part of it. Now it started, Jesus says, this is my blood of the new covenant. It's initiated. He dies, ratifies that covenant, sends down his spirit the spirit of the new covenant down in. And that's it. It started. It's initiated. People are now coming in and becoming betrothed to Yeshua. Paul describes himself as a minister of a new covenant. Well, Paul knows what new covenant means. It's the covenant between Judah and Israel. He says, not of the letter, but of the Spirit, placing a reference to Jeremiah's new covenant prophecy at the very center of his self-presentation and positioning his ministry with the Jeremiah framework. Paul knows very what the new covenant is, and Paul says, I am a minister of the new covenant. And the new covenant is to bring Judah and Israel together in a wedding concept, right? But yet, down at the bottom, it says similar. Paul's most famous appellation is that he's also apostle of the Gentiles. He was sent to the Gentiles. Well, if the Gentiles meant non-Israelites, like Italians and Germans and French and whatever, how does that apostle of the Gentiles work with being a minister of the new covenant, which is strictly with Israel and Judah? The only way that works is that Gentiles are part of that equation. They're either Israel or Judah. And Paul is a minister bringing seeing the bigger picture. As Nelson pointed out that Nelson and Denise have studied and researched and shared our information as to bring in what this meaning of Gentile is, and to break that 2,000-year mistranslation. We see what it meant in Jeremiah. It meant Abraham was going to have a bunch of Gentiles. It meant Moses was going to be part of a holy bunch of Gentiles, right? And that through his seed, Abraham would be a multitude of Gentiles, a father of a multitude of Gentiles. This is all connected, and this doesn't have anything Gentile, at least Jerome's interpretation. Jerome's not at fault. So we come to Hosea 1, and this is how God is going to start pulling in this plan, because they've been divorced, they've been cut off, they've been kicked out of the house. And Paul is seeing this. He quotes Hosea, and he says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sands of the sea. Who's Hosea talking to? Talking to the northern tribe, talking to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That Jesus says, I've only come for the lost sheep of Israel because they got cut off, they got divorced. I got to remarry them. I need them to make a new wedding contract. And he says, the smell of the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people. That's divorce language. There it shall be said to them, you are sons of the living God. That's new covenant language, new wedding covenant language. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together. Look what he said in Hosea, that the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together. And all in the context of new covenant language, that you are not my people, but you will be my people. And appoint over themselves one head, and they shall become up and into the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. So there's going to be one, this is Judah and Israel gathered together, just like he said in the new covenant, Judah and Israel make a new covenant, and when they're a new covenant, well, I'm just going to call them Israel. And they will appoint themselves one head, Yeshua. Has that happened yet? I say no. Then in Hosea 2, I will betroth you to me forever. Wedding language, betrothal language, to the divorced woman, to the one kicked out, the one he couldn't bring back because she's an abomination. Yet he promised her that I will be betrothed to you forever. Yes, I will be betrothed to you, to me in righteousness, meaning legally, and justice and loving kindness and mercy. And I will betroth you to me in faithfulness. It's going to be complete fidelity. You'll never cheat on me again. And you shall know the Lord. So Hosea is clearly, and the word Hosea means salvation, right? It's Hoshea, and Joshua's name was Yahushua. Yah saves. Now here's in the book, we could call this the book of salvation, Hoshea. And how is the book? It's about a guy that marries a harlot that has kids with other men, and he says, your kid's not my people, and you're not, and I'll have no mercy on you, and you'll be scattered, right? That's the name of the kids. But then he says, I'll still be betrothed to you and to me forever, legally, righteously, in mercy. Tells Hosea, no mercy. It's one of the children's names. Then we come to Paul. He's understanding this bigger picture. He's a minister of a new covenant, which is Judah and Israel. One was divorced, cut off, kicked out of the house. And so he's a minister of reconciling this family feud, this family problem. And he says in Romans 7, or do you not know, brethren, I speak to those who know the law, that Israel has dominion, or that law has dominion over you, over a man as long as he lives. For the woman who has a husband is bound by the law. What law? The law of the husband. To her husband as long as he lives. But if the husband dies, she's released from the law of the husband. Therefore, my brethren, you also have become dead to the law. What law? The law of the husband. Everybody goes, oh, it's the Mosaic law, where it says, don't have any other gods before me. We're dead to that law, right? Don't kill your neighbor and don't steal from your neighbor. We're dead to that law. No, that's not what he's saying. You're dead to the law of the husband. Because he says through the body of Christ, that was the husband that died, that you may be married to another, to him who was raised from the dead, that we should bear fruit to God. So in Romans 7, he's saying that what God was telling you in Deuteronomy 24, that's what it says for you men who know the law. And he's a minister of a new covenant, a minister of Judah and Israel, and they have to be brought together into one, like in Ezekiel 37, the two sticks. But one of these people who've been divorced, cut off, and created abomination can't be back unless the husband dies. So the husband dies, so that he can remarry what was formerly his bride, right? Because otherwise he's going to have 10/12 of the bride that he can't marry. 10/12 of the kingdom he can't rule over. And the northern tribe has got Ephraim, which has got the firstborn blessing. And the first Passover was for the redemption of the firstborn. Now Ephraim's the firstborn. He's got to redeem Ephraim, and that's why he says, I've only come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Because I've got to die as a husband to release the northern tribe, the lost sheep, the divorced ones, the kicked out ones, from the law of the husband, so that we can be joined together in a wedding covenant language, which is called the new covenant. 1 Corinthians 10, moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware. Now this is really strange here. He's talking to Corinthians, right? And he says, brother, I don't want you to be unaware that all of our fathers were under the cloud. All passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For that drink that they of the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But he's saying, he's talking to Corinthians. These are supposed to be Gentiles, non-ethnic Jews. And he's talking to the Corinthians, and he's saying all of our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea and had baptism, and all were baptized into Moses, into the cloud and into the sea, and all ate the spiritual food, which was manna. And all drank the spiritual drink. Who's he talking about here? Why is he telling the Corinthians that all our fathers? Does he know that the Corinthians' fathers were there with Moses? Or is he understanding this to be part of the lost sheep of the house of Israel, part of the 10 tribes that were scattered amongst the nations? Some of them landed in Corinthians. And so I'm saying that Paul sees this and he recognizes them as brothers, as lost sheep. It goes on to say, he says, now these things become our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted, and do not become idolaters as they were some of them. So don't do as their fathers. We need to move past that. And then in 1 Corinthians 12:2, he says, you know that ye were Gentiles carried away into these dumb idols, even as you were led. You know that you were Gentiles, or ethne, as Paul writes, nations. You were nations carried away into these dumb idols, even though as you were led. When did the Corinthians ever get led to dumb idols? When did they get carried away? They grew up in Corinthians. Their fathers grew up in Corinthians. Their grandfathers grew up in Corinthians. When were they ever led to the idols? They just grew up in idolatry. But he's saying you were led. But in 1 Corinthians 10, he says all of our fathers went through the Red Sea. Right? So he's connecting the Exodus picture and attaching it to the 1 Corinthians. And say you were once nations carried away into these dumb idols, even as you were led. That same language is here in 2 Kings 17. He says, and they rejected his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers and his testimonies which he had testified against them. And they followed idols, led, became idolaters, and went after the nations who were all around them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them that they should not do like them. So it's the same language, but he's connecting it to the Corinthians. They were led to idols. They followed idols. Because the Corinthians were never led off to idols, unless he's connecting it to their fathers, which he quotes in chapter 10, all of our fathers. And all of our fathers followed idols. And now you, part of that group. Still in 2 Corinthians, come out among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. He's quoting Isaiah 52. Depart, go out from there, touch no unclean thing. Go out from the midst of her, be clean, you who bear the vessels of the Lord. Isaiah 52 is clearly talking about like Levites. The vessels are the furniture of the Lord. They're the armory that they were. Those were all the things. This was what Israelites, whether they were mixed multitude or ethnic, that they were involved in this process. And he's connecting it to the 2 Corinthians verse 6. And quoting Isaiah 52 and telling them to do the same thing. And Concan makes a significant contribution, that's Latin, just in case you know, to Pauline studies by imaging the responses of the Corinthians to Paul's letter based on surviving written materials and archaeological research. This book offers textured portrait of an ancient Corinthians with whom Paul conversed. So this Concanon wrote a book called When You Were Gentiles, and he's using surviving written materials and archaeological research to prove that Paul is making the connection to the Corinthians, to those that were led in the Exodus. I'd like to know what was in that book. So, there's reason to believe that Paul is talking to the Corinthians this way and making connections to the Exodus, the people that became the northern tribe. Colossians 2, and you being dead in your trespass and the uncircumcision of your flesh. Trespass is parabasis. In the Hebrew, it's pesha, and it means to break an agreement that you made. In the New Testament, this word parabasis refers to a willful discard of breaking God's law. If the Colossians 2 people are Gentiles, not connected to the Israelite nation, how can they be dead in trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh? They were never required to have circumcised flesh. And it says that you broke your agreement about the circumcision of your flesh. That's what Paul is saying here. They can't just be plain people. He's connecting Colossians 2 people to Israelite community. Northern tribe, the lost sheep. In verse 16, he says, so let no one judge you in food or in drink regarding festival or new moon or Sabbath, which are shadow of the things to come, but the substance is of Christ. He says, let no one judge you. And everybody thinks, oh, yeah, they think the Jews are judging them, but there's no context in Colossians 2. It's all in a Gnostic environment. And he says, let no one judge you. He's not saying don't let anybody judge you because you do them. And he doesn't say don't let anybody judge you because you don't do them. You have to get it from the context of the rest of Colossians and other places. And then he says, because they're saying that Paul is saying, you don't need to do the festival, the new moon, the Sabbath. These are all shadows of things to come, like Zechariah 14, right? When all the nations will come up to the king. That's a shadow of the things. You don't need to practice that one. That's not what Paul's saying. And then he says, but, that means in opposition to what? Opposition to those who are judging you in these manners. So don't let anybody judge you, but the substance is of Christ. This is how it's translated, right? But the Greek word is somaton Christo. But the body of Christ. He's saying, don't let anybody judge you, but the body of Christ. He uses this same phrase in 1 Corinthians 12. Don't you know that you are the somaton Christo? So, but I think this is damage control. Because they don't want anybody to saying, oh, don't let anybody judge you but the body of Christ. No, we can't have that because that sounds like, that might make people think they have to do the feasts and Sabbaths. And so there's a problem. I'm saying it's a bias. It could mean substance of Christ, but Paul only uses this phrase twice, once here and once in Corinthians, and they both mean the body of Christ. And if he meant that they shouldn't be doing it, he should say, because now you find him over here in 1 Corinthians. He says, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, but with leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity. 1 Corinthians 5, he's teaching them how to do unleavened bread and how to do it correctly with the purpose of unleavened bread. Well, if he was said, don't let anybody judge you, and now he's teaching the Corinthians? Or in 1 Corinthians 11, he says, take this as my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. He's talking about the Passover, and he's giving instructions on not to get drunk. Stop eating all the food, right? He doesn't say, you shouldn't be doing these. He doesn't say that. He's telling them how to walk this out, because those are part of the new covenant. Paul's a minister of the new covenant, and he wants to bring everybody into the obedience of God. In Romans 1, he says that he wants to bring everybody into the obedience of the nations, right? That word obedience is hypoakuo. Hypo meaning under, like hypodermic, and akuo is what you hear. So it's be submissive to what you hear, and he wants that submissive to what you hear, that's the obedience, and he says, and he intends that's to be for all the nations, right? That word hypokua in the Old Testament, in the Septuagint, is the word Shema. He's saying he wants the nations to Shema, and he's quoting Genesis 49, which, he says, until Shiloh comes, and then when he comes, the obedience of the nations shall be his. Whoa, that's Paul's vision. That's the New Testament. That's the new covenant. We miss all those things. Ephesians 2, and you were made alive, you were dead in your trespasses. The Ephesians are supposed to be Gentiles, but now he's calling them trespassers. Pesha, somebody who broke God's law. How can that be? Therefore, remember that you were once Gentiles in the flesh, who were called uncircumcision by what is called circumcision in the flesh, by the hands that at time you were without Christ, being estranged from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the covenants, that's plural, of promise, having no hope with God in the world, but now in Christ you were once far off, have now been brought near by the blood of Christ. That's a mouthful. But he's saying you were once Gentiles. What are they now? Not Gentiles? No, you were once nations, but now you're being brought in as a holy nation, a set-apart nation, through the blood of Christ. You were divorced, cut off, kicked out of the house, but now the husband's died. You can now come in through the blood of Christ. And, for years, people would say, oh, these are Gentiles. These are non-ethnic people, non-Israelite people. And when I read this, and I read Exodus 12 saying that when the stranger comes in, he can do the Passover and he'll be as native born. Well, Christianity says no, they couldn't be native born. They can't be in the thing. They had to wait till Christ came and died for the sins of mankind to be included. And literally, at this point, when I understood, and I thought Paul was doing away with the law and saying that the Gentiles were never able to come in before, knowing that Exodus 12 says they could, I literally said, I need to take Paul out of the camp and take a bag of rocks with me. And I thought that for like a couple of years. Okay. But then it was the same verse. Once I understood it, then the paradigm changes, because he's not talking. It's the word Gentile that gets us thrown off. When the fullness of the Gentiles. Well, that's when the last sinner says the Lord's Prayer, and then we're all off. Man, it's a whole misrepresentation of what's going on. They've excluded the whole picture from Abraham to the end. So really what he's saying here is you were once nations, but now you can be a holy nation in the flesh who are called uncircumcised, that at that time you were without Christ, estranged from the commonwealth, strangers from the only people that meet this criteria who were cut off from the covenants, cut off of the commonwealth, was the northern tribe. Because why? Because they got divorced. This word is strange. It's like if a husband and wife are not living together, they're estranged, they're separated. That's the term that he's using here in this Greek word, that you were separated from your husband, separated from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope. And then he goes off, you were far off and near. That's terms that Solomon applies to the exiles. That in Daniel 9, when he's talking about the covenants, he's quoting far and near. Those are attached to the exiles, and Paul is using far and near, meaning exiles. You were once nations, now you're holy nations, because you now could come in through the blood of Christ. The husbands died. The law of the husband has been lifted. Matthew 4:5, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, Galilee of the nations. Galilee of the Gentiles. So he's connecting two Israelite tribes with Gentiles. It's a problem. Isaiah, and then he's quoting Isaiah 9:1, which is the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, afterward more heavily oppressed by her by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan in the Galilee of Gentiles. He's quoting Isaiah 9, connecting to Matthew 4, but calling it Gentiles because of Jerome. Tobit talks about a time when that he will bring the house to the former one until the appointed times of an age be completed. So Tobit sees this, and there's this concept that I read in this book. It's called restoration eschatology. And once you start to see it, I'm seeing it everywhere. Here in Tobit, it's talking about a time when they will return from their exiles and they will build Jerusalem honorably, and the house of God will be built in its glorious house. This is in Tobit, who was a Naphtali, who's to Assyria, right? When the Assyrians come in and took the northern nation out and took on captivity. This is all the way back there, but he's seeing a future when all this restoration eschatology will be built. Qumran, 4Q370, a fragment that looks forward to the day when Joseph and his brothers will return, offer sacrifices and praise, when God will also destroy the foreigners. So this fragment in 4Q talks about Joseph, who was the father of Ephraim, that Ephraim became the leader of the northern tribe, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And they look forward to a time when Joseph and his brothers will return after sacrifices. Judah, in Israelite, took a 2-page ad out in the New Jerusalem Post, and it, 2 full pages, and it said, this is a few years ago, and it said, Ephraim, come home. The Jews are still waiting for Ephraim to come home. It hasn't happened yet. Some of the Christian community says, oh no, it's done, it's over. He's fulfilled his promise. The Jews are in the land. But Jews are saying, no, we want them to come home, because they know that's the full house of the Israel. They know that's the new covenant in Jeremiah. The War Scroll looks forward to an eschatological battle fought by the 12 tribes of Israel. 12 tribes. That's restoration eschatology language. Ezra and Nehemiah does not give a triumphant account of the promised restoration of Israel. They don't show that where that happened. The dedication of the temple also conspicuously lacks the glory of God. It characterizes the dedications of Solomon's temple and the tabernacle. Where's the pillar of fire. It never comes back with Ezra and Nehemiah. In the Amidah, that's the standing prayer that they say 18 benedictions, then they added a 19th for the Christians. But this is one of their standing, just Amidah means the standing prayer. Sound the great shore for our freedom. Raise a banner to gather our exiles. And they say this every day, I think twice a day. Paul says at the end of the Acts, and he says, and this is the hope that I have, that we say twice a day. He's talking about the standing prayer. Sound the great shofar for our freedom. Raise a banner to gather our exiles and bring us together from the four corners of the earth into our land. Blessed are you, Lord, who gathers the dispersed of people of Israel. From the four corners, the dispersed. They say this every day. Today, they know that hasn't happened yet. So that Amidah is restoration eschatology. The term gospel echoes restoration promises in Isaiah, in Isaiah 40, 52, 61, Joel 3. In the Septuagint, even more plainly, Jesus promised that they will sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. There weren't 12 tribes at the time of Jesus. 10 of them were scattered. But he's talking about restoration eschatology. This is going to happen. God will keep his promise. He will bring in the 12 tribes. And Christianity will take another look, at least the ones that are trying to replace Israel. Jesus says and sends his disciples to who? The lost sheep of the house of Israel. This is the time of Jesus. He knows they're still lost. James knows they're lost. Writes a letter to him. Peter knows they're lost. Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd, tying himself to the promises that God would restore Israel. The Lord's Prayer, right? Restoration language. Your kingdom come. Jesus promised he'd make his disciples fishers of humans, right? The fishers he's talking about is the fishers when Jacob lays his hand on Ephraim and says, you're going to grow like fish on the land. Fish don't grow on the land. Then Jeremiah 16 says, we're going to send out the fishermen for the exiles. Then Jesus says, gentlemen, I'm going to make you the fishers of men. Jeremiah was talking about you, and Jacob was talking about the exiles that you're going to go after. The Last Supper narrative is full of Israelite restoration themes, right? This is the new covenant. Jeremiah 11, he says, the Lord called your name green olive tree and lovely and good fruit with the noise of a great tumult. He has kindled fire you and broken its branches. Jeremiah is calling the olive tree and then calling it Israel. It's Israel is the olive tree. But the olive tree represents a holy tree, a set-apart tree. And if branches start coming off and they're not holy, he chops them off. Chopped all the northern king branches off, sent them off to Assyria. Judah, you want to act the same way? Cuts their branches off, sends them off to Nebuchadnezzar. He will not have unholy branches on a holy tree, which is supported by the root, which the root is Yeshua. If the root's holy, the rest of the tree's holy. If the branches are not, they need to be removed. Then we get to Romans 11. This is the two trees, the wild tree and the wild olive tree and the cultivated olive tree. But most people don't talk about that the two olive trees, they're two olive trees. And Jeremiah and Hosea calls the olive tree Israel. So the wild olive tree is the northern tribes. They were part of Israel, but they're wild. They got cut off. They got scattered. They got divorced, kicked out of the house. Judah never did. And so but when Judah disbehaves, he cuts them off, sends them off to Nebuchadnezzar. But he wants to graft everything. He wants this holy tree to be thing. And so these two trees are still, they're still olive trees. One's an olive tree of the northern tribe, one's the olive tree of the southern tribe. And he wants to graft in the lost sheep into the one tree, right? Make it all holy through the root of Yeshua. So then he says in verse 13, for I speak to you, Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, apostle to the nations. He's talking about Romans here, which clearly is including a messianic community. He says, if by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are of my flesh, and save some of them, for if their being cast away is reconciling of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? Right? Life from the dead? Well, the whole message is about two trees, right? Walnut tree, cultivated tree, northern tribe tree, Judah tree. But Ezekiel is also talking about the same thing, and Paul is making that connection, because when he says, go get yourself a stick for Judah and a stick for Ephraim and put them together, those words for stick is etz, means it can mean tree. And so I'm going to say that he's saying, go get yourself a tree from Judah and one from Ephraim, and I want them to be one tree. I want them to be one olive tree, right? And Ezekiel 37 is talking about that, but it's all in the context of a resurrection of Israel. All the bones come to life, and the flesh comes on the bones, and this resurrection. That's why he says, when the reconciling of the world, when their acceptance be, is life from the dead. So when the 12 tribes come together, like Ezekiel 37 says, these are the 12 tribes, blow life into them. That's life from the dead. And Paul is saying, that's New Testament, New Covenant, restoration eschatology that comes in. And Ezekiel 37 ends with, and then I will put you in the land, and then I will put my tabernacle in your place, and I will always be with you, and I will be with the men. That's Revelation 21:22 language. That's restoration eschatology. Two tribes, two nations together, one tree, one holy tree, through Yeshua, through the seed of the promise. Romans, almost done. Romans, I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness is in part happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles had come in, and so all Israel be saved. I got friends, they don't want Israel to be saved. They reject Messiah, right? And so he goes, I just don't get it. It doesn't feel right. And I say, my friend, you're been skewed by the word Gentile. It's been weaponized against the plan of God, the Abraham covenant, the new covenant. You can't have any of those without the whole house of Israel. And so when Paul is talking about this, you can't understand this unless you go back to Genesis 48. You see Jacob laying his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh. And Ephraim means to be fruitful. God told Jacob, you're going to be fruitful and a father of a multitude of nations. You've got Ephraim standing in front of you. His name's fruitful. And he's a multitude of nations. He's got Hebrew in him and he's got Egyptian in him, because Joseph married an Egyptian bride. Paul says, this is the guy. I got to put my hand on him, because this is what God was talking about. And he says, and this guy's going to grow into a multitude of fish on the earth. And he says, and Ephraim is going to be, he says, your younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. Milo ha-goim, right? In the Septuagint, it's pleroma ton ethne. Paul uses the same thing in the Septuagint that's describing Genesis 48 as the fullness of the Gentiles, or the fullness of the nations, and he's using that in Romans 11 and quoting it verbatim from the Septuagint. meaning that Paul understands that he's pulling this from Genesis 48. You can't make sense of it without it. In Genesis 48, Joseph goes to dad and he's partially blind. Romans 11, and Israel, partially blind. Jacob, these will be my sons. It's an adoption, and they become his sons. And there's adoption in Romans 11. All the parallels are there. You just got to go match them up. And then you'll understand who the fullness of the Gentiles is. And it's not the last question raising his hand, saying the Lord's Prayer. It's not. And it's the word that's Gentiles has been weaponized. So Paul, the essence of Pauline antithesis lies in the covenant's respective abilities to empower their members. Ezekiel 36 is just loaded with restoration eschatology. Jeremiah 31, the new covenant, promises of a time when the people will obey God, not because there will be different requirements, but because God will renovate the people, giving a new heart, a new spirit, taking away their heart of stone, which is the heart of rebellion. So he's going to accept them in their rebellious state and take away that ability and cause them to walk in their ways. And they will accomplish it. And that's what he's saying here, because God, he promised a time when the people will obey God, not because there's different requirements, but because God will renovate people, supplying them with new resources, fidelity. The new resources, a new heart, a new spirit, a resurrected body, that now you can stay in the land because you now have the tools to be obedient to your God. And that concludes the story. So just to top this off, so you can see that this broad picture, Abraham's descendants, Gentiles, nations, grafted into the Abraham thing. That's the big picture. And then we just got to walk through the rest of the thing, and how he does it. He does it through congregation of Israel and a mixed multitude, and then, and then they all screw up. But, God has a plan for all of us, and we're all, we're included. We just need to, like the potter's clay, we need to stay moldable and flexible and let him mold us in what he wants. Thank you, and God bless.
How much are we comprehending? I don't know. Yeah, we gotta walk through it. We gotta search it out.